First, I'd just like to thank everyone for showing up. Kathy, Professor Roos, for inviting me here today. It's a real honor to speak in front of you guys. I hope that from your comments and criticism will help me make this paper that I'm a work in progress stronger, as well as your expertise. The topic is Sino-Myanmar relations, energy and politics. In this presentation, less directly on politics, I'll touch on it a bit, at least in a conventional sense. Specifically, I'll be focusing on hydro, but I can certainly speak to a broader relationships going on during question period. Just a couple disclaimers before continuing. I was going to put a slide up about Burma, Myanmar, whatever you want to call it. For those who are unfamiliar with it, I didn't. So just very quickly, the country's been under military rule since 1962. It's been relatively isolated within the international community until China stepped in the late 1980s, and then subsequently the neighboring nations started investing in it commonly. It's received strong international criticism relating to human insecurity. You can look any way you want to define human security, pretty much. It's present in Myanmar. You can look at UNHCI, the rank at the bottom of that, 138 for the 180 nations. Corruption Perception Index, Political Terror Scale, Global Peace Index. They tend to represent the bottom end of the issue. And China has been important to ally political, economic, and military in supporting this regime. That being said, I do want to re-emphasize the point just made that there are elements within China that are concerned with reforming Myanmar. That's not what I'll be speaking to. I'm just going to start by reading the intro, and then I'll get into some of the slides here. Approaching Sino-Myanmar relations from a human security perspective is problematic, because this perspective is largely absent in China's foreign policy. There has been a growing resurgence of non-interventionist approaches to international relations within the Asia-Pacific, embodied within China's foreign policy and regional organizations such as ASEAN. Conservative adherence to state sovereignty and non-interference in the domestic affairs of other states has called into question the relevance of human security. Some have argued that China's foreign policy represents a trend toward an Eastphalian international order, the Westphalian adoption of the Westphalian rule, excluding the possibility of humanitarian or rights-based normative regime from taking root. Not only does this present a moral dilemma in instances where the rights and security of individuals are being compromised by state sovereignty, but presents a broader challenge to Western influence within the region, also just touched on in the last presentation. Consequently, China's unconditional investment in authoritarian regimes such as Myanmar has frustrated Western efforts to isolate and intervene in these states through economic sanctions and multilateral resolutions. Furthermore, competition for scarce investment opportunities and access to resources, particularly in developing countries with weak governance mechanisms, has encouraged some states who would have previously opposed investment in such regimes to compromise their ideas and enter what you could loosely term a race to the bottom, I guess. India is an example of this in Myanmar. This has led some to suggest that China's increasing economic integration into the global economy presents an ideological challenge to the West, in which authoritarianism, so I'm quoting this, authoritarianism fights aggressively and confidently, while democracy is inclined to surrender. This has very much been represented in the relationship with Myanmar. After a political crackdown in the late 1980s, in which thousands of student protesters, pro-democracy protesters were killed by Myanmar's central government, the West sought to isolate the regime. As such, China was able to move in and forge strong relations. As a result, Myanmar continues to be governed by a brutal and corrupt regime with little chance of reforming in the foreseeable future. This case would only seem to confirm the irrelevance of trying to employ a human security paradigm in a region where motivations and intentions are typically described in terms of realpolitik. However, and this is where my study is coming in, if we re-envision China's relationship in Myanmar from a domestic perspective, both within China and within Myanmar, I think there is some room for understanding the different complexities which shape the investments currently going on. Specifically, I haven't elaborated this on a lot, but I hope to, the relationship between the local and the central government in China and the competing interests, where Myanmar is a diplomatic embarrassment for the central government, but there are strong economic interests in Yunnan province, frequently contribute to human rights abuses. All right, well, I'll get to the interesting stuff. Okay, this basically sums up my initial interest in the topic. I'm sure you've read it thousands of times over. With China's growth has quadrupled, energy consumption's doubled. Touched on before, coal represents the largest portion of China's energy system, and it is unlikely that it will be able to move off that system anytime in the near future. Also touched on before, the legitimacy of the regime often depends on economic growth. I think Susan Shirk cites a stat of 7% GDP growth a year is sort of like the mandatory minimum, creating 20 million jobs plus just to sort of sustain the status quo. Obviously, there are qualifiers for that, and we're seeing that more and more as protests increase, and there's increasing social and environmental factors. Chinese foreign policy has responded by becoming more active in securing foreign energy supplies, specifically by allowing its NOCs and other state-owned enterprises increased incentives to invest abroad as part of this sort of going out strategy. This has happened in hydropower as well. It has expanded rapidly overseas just recently, completed as much as 90% of all overseas Chinese dam projects within the last decade alone. Chinese overseas expansion in hydro can be attributed to a number of factors, including increased domestic competition between Chinese firms, development of local expertise, decentralization of the hydropower production, low operating costs, and the need to secure foreign energy. That last part will be sort of my focus. All right, so Chinese dams go local. International Rivers put out a report in 2008 highlighting all of the projects that China is involved in hydropower. I think the total there should be 97 large dam projects in 39 different countries. As you can see, quite a few projects in Africa, but the biggest growth has been in Southeast Asia, and specifically Myanmar. That 16 is a gross underrepresentation. I can get that later. Statistics are a little hard to come by for investment, but it has recently been reported that China's invested $5 billion in Myanmar's hydropower sector since May of 2010, this year alone. That is a market increase, but as Earth Rights International reports, at least 45 Chinese, multinational corporations have been involved in 63 hydro projects in Burma, so it sort of contradicts that 16 level, but a lot of them are sort of smaller. There's different ways of measuring this. Just that's a breakdown of Earth Rights International assessment of Chinese investment in Myanmar's resource sectors. Overall, 90 projects, 69 companies, and hydro tends to represent the bulk of those. As just mentioned, calculating project cost is difficult, but engineers generally estimate that it costs about $1 million US per megawatt of installed capacity to build a hydropower dam. On this, you can look at a list of projects here, and Myanmar's overall realizable capacity is estimated at 38,000 megawatts. And here I've just listed enough to get us up to 27,000 plus megawatts of installed capacity, partly because I didn't want to use data that wasn't entirely reliable. So the potential is for 38,000. It's currently at 1,700, so there's a big gap there, and there's other countries trying to exploit that. So if we take the 1 million US per installed megawatt, that would put project costs at over $27 billion. So it's a substantial amount of revenue. In the far column here, I just listed some of the companies involved in these projects. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but China Southern Power Grid, Sino-Hydro, Chinese Power Investment Corporation. Earth Rates International provides a pretty substantial list in the appendix of their 2008 report. Some examples of the more controversial. I've just concluded two of the more controversial dam projects. Insecurity, which is on the Irrawaddy confluence in Kashmir State. There's estimates of 3,600 megawatts of installed capacity is what they're projecting. I've seen estimates go as high as 6,000, but some clear where the discrepancy lies. But it would be 152 meters high, project cost $3.6 billion. It began in 2007, won't be finished for a number of years. And the Pasang Dam on Salween River in Shan State, much bigger project, huge project. It's 228 meters high, we put higher, taller than the Three Rivers Dam in China. Project cost estimates between 6 and 9 billion. Again, there's a bit of discrepancy there. 6, obviously the low figure, all over that. All well and good, what does that mean for human security? I've tracked a number of leaders in Myanmar to try to grapple operationally with this concept. I think it's one of the biggest difficulties and challenges that human security faces is how to make it relevant. And I've stolen this 2 days ago from a report in 2005 called Threat to the Peace. It was done by a law firm, it's cited down below. It was commissioned by, Backlav Havel, former president of the Czech Republic, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. They've both sort of been trying to trump the cause of intervention or reform in Myanmar. I think they wrote the forward and some Suu Kyi's book, Freedom from Fear. And what they identified is a list of 6 criteria, well, actually 4 or 5, the other one they just throw on. For previous resolutions, the rationale that the UN Security Council has used to intervene in other countries. And I'm not making the case for intervention. That's already been made. It's in here. They tried it in 2007. China shot them down with a veto, as well as Russia and South Africa. What I'm trying to show here is that China's policy of non-intervention is very misleading. Now, it might seem a little obvious, but it helps to sort of prove these things. There's almost a mirror effect. I'm trying to prove through each one of these points how Chinese investment in Myanmar's dam industry contributes directly to fueling insecurity. So it's almost an index of, will become an index of interference. So each box in orange is where there's a reason that was present in the example. So in Sierra Leone, overthrow of a democratic government, conflict among factions, human rights violations, and refugees flows. Those were used as justifications by the Security Council for intervention. All right? In 2005, no case had been made for Myanmar, even though all of those plus an HIV/AIDS epidemic was present. terms of hydropower, International Rivers estimates that over 10 million people have been displaced within China by hydropower development. 1.2 million by the Three Gorges Dam alone. You guys might have slightly different statistics, and that's fine. These are just general ones I've pulled from different articles. As China's dam industry goes global, the problem is its foreign hydro projects have tended to adopt the questionable practices it exercises at home, and in many cases, to a less restrained and more harmful degree. By exporting energy generation to Myanmar, China is able to acquire cheap electricity while leaving the negative economic, social, and environmental impacts of those dams on the Burmese side of the border. In particular, it poses a challenge to insecurity because these projects, as touched on before, oil projects involves a large presence of the Burmese military, which results in forced labor, forced relocation, tortures, beatings, sexual violence, confiscation of land, you name it. What I'm going to try to do is go through each one of these criteria by criteria. So overthrow of a democratically elected government. As you can see in Myanmar, they had a military coup in 1962. 1988 democracy protests led to another coup and a violent crackdown by the state, even though it was already a military government. In 1990, they actually held elections, and defied my logic why, but they lost monumentally. I think the NLD won something like 80% of the vote, or 80 of the seats. They just ignored it and locked up the leader on some house arrest. 2007, also called the Saffron Revolution, led by students and Buddhist monks. Pro-democracy protests again were met by a violent government crackdown, including the unprecedented beating and killing of monks, which is a big cultural taboo, to say the least. 2010, tomorrow, elections, first time in 20 years, so stay tuned. Okay, so what does China have to do? Well, the first bit is since 1988, that's when the relationships started to grow stronger. There's been economic, political, and military support, and I'll show you the slides in 2 seconds. The focus that I want to get on, and I have to do a little more research on, is how hydropower specifically played a role in fueling this instance of overthrowing democratically elected government. So far, basically the Chinese government favors a very stable situation in Myanmar, whatever it is, in part because it has substantial infrastructure projects which take up a number of years. Part of this has been paying lip service to the 7-step roadmap to democracy, which is what tomorrow's election is about. I'll talk about that later, but the idea is they're trying to take the military government and entrench it in a new civilian government, but it's still going to be the same people ruling the country in the same fashion. And so, in this way, Chinese investments, their interests are counter to democratic movements that what might compromise those investments. Okay, in terms of China's political support, economic, political, and military support, this graph shows bilateral trade from 1950 to 2001. Now, if you look at 1989 to the end of the millennium, you'll see the trade shot up rapidly. Well, why is that important? Because during the exact same time, at least from 1988 to 1995, the military expanded by a factor of 2. I think it went from 170,000 troops to 370? Yeah. 180,000 to 370,000 troops. They also underwent a series of military modernization, as indicated by this graph, which shows basically the value in US millions of arms imports to Myanmar. So at the exact same time, the military is trying to expand its control of the country. Again, you can see it shoots up. Blue is in China. Blue is China. The other big one to watch out for is Russia. and it shoots up at the beginning of the 90s and drops off towards the end of the decade. And sort of settled down since. All right. Conflict, interstate conflict. That's bad for human security for a number of reasons. Myanmar has been described as having the longest running armed conflict in the world. Human Security Report estimates 232 conflicts years between 1946 and 2003. Obviously, if you're having more than one conflict, more than one group in a year, that counts as more than one conflict a year. India was second. They had 156, so they got wiped out. What's the role of Chinese dams? They provide revenue, increased resource competition. Again, incentive for military expansion because you want to consolidate those resources. I've listed a couple examples of different dams. The Hackney Dam, offensive in the area to secure the area, result in displacement of 10,000 plus. Tasang Dam, 300,000 forced to rotate since 1996. In all fairness, China's only been involved since 2007 in that one, but there's estimates for that time period about 10,000. And Myetzong, there was a bombing earlier this spring, I think killed like 3 Chinese workers. In terms of human rights, I've covered some of that stuff, so I'll just let you read through it if you want. But basically, Chinese dams, infrastructure development is increased military presence, as I mentioned before. There's displacement, violence, forced labor. This happened at the Tasang Dam site. Renewed scorched earth campaign, torture, killing. Incidents, documentation by NGOs, but it's there. Refugees. Again, this is sort of really how do I define displacement? We got a serious refugee problem, but even a bigger IDP problem, internally displaced persons. This is really relevant to human security because it almost represents a situation when people are trying to flee the authority of the state to find security somewhere else. I mean, that's not an indication of the state's ability to provide human security than what it is, aside from suicide, but that's. And those are some instances of displacement in Myanmar involving Chinese investment on the right side. Drug production and trafficking. Second largest producer of opium in the world, was the first before Afghanistan got into it, and is a world producer in methamphetamine. Chinese dams. Well, they partner in a lot of projects with Asia World Co., which was founded by I can't say names, Qingtang, famous opium drug lord. Also, the military regime itself, who receives revenues from these projects, has been accused, suspected, incidentally documented, certain officials anyway, of being involved in the drug trade, including forcing farmers to grow opium. HIV/AIDS, severe epidemic. I haven't really flushed this one out that much, but it's obviously related to drug use. It's spreading into China, estimates of 10 million cases in southern Myanmar province. In terms of dam sites, there's an increased prevalence of HIV, sexual violence, and sex industry, largely associated again with setting up military camps. It all sort of connects to that. So it's just how you look at it. What next? Basically, tomorrow, the institutionalization of an authoritarian government in Myanmar as a civilian government. What's going to happen? Well, the status quo is sort of my prediction. There could be a consolidation of power in which the central government is able to somehow take over the ethnic autonomous regions that line its border. Or there's the possibility of increased political stability and things like that. All right, that was a rush, but got through it.
Thank you.